The evening air hung heavy with the scent of roses and burning tallow as Ashbourne Manor's grand ballroom shimmered beneath a canopy of golden light. Chandeliers, their crystal prisms catching every flicker of flame, scattered rainbows across polished marble floors. Servants flitted silently along the edges, trays of champagne and delicate confections balanced with meticulous precision, their presence barely acknowledged by the gathered aristocracy. Ladies in silken gowns of every conceivable hue whispered behind fans, their laughter light and sharp, as the men of the ton in tailcoats and powdered wigs exchanged measured compliments and subtle barbs. Among them moved Lady Eleanor, the daughter of a minor baronet, whose chestnut curls were coiled into an artful arrangement that framed a face both lively and alert. She carried herself with the grace expected of her class, yet her eyes, bright, curious, and unyielding, betrayed a mind unwilling to bow entirely to convention. Eleanor had learned early that a lady's life was measured in glances, in the weight of polite silence, and in the careful navigation of whispers. And yet, tonight, a peculiar thrill coursed through her veins. Perhaps it was the anticipation of seeing the Duke of Ashbourne in person, the man whose reputation for austere authority preceded him across the counties. Or perhaps it was simply the exhilaration of existing, for a single evening, in a world so dazzling yet so rigid. She had overheard the whispers long before she arrived. The Duke, stern, commanding, nearly untouchable in his dominion over estate and society alike, never suffered foolishness lightly. His very presence could silence a room. Yet Eleanor, with a penchant for curiosity that often led her into trouble, found the notion of encountering him intoxicating rather than intimidating. The orchestra struck the first notes of a minuet, and couples began to glide across the floor with precise, deliberate steps. Eleanor remained at the periphery, observing the careful choreography of social grace, the subtle shifts of attention, the unspoken negotiations of power that played out in smiles and half-bows. It was then, across the room, that she saw him, the Duke of Ashbourne. He stood near the eastern balcony, tall and formidable, his coat impeccably tailored, his posture and exercise and authority perfected through years of expectation and inheritance. His dark eyes swept the ballroom with a cold precision, noting every slight, every misstep, every whispered jest. Yet, in that very scrutiny, Eleanor felt a spark of defiance, not from arrogance, nor from a desire to offend, but from the irrepressible awareness that she would not be made invisible. Their eyes met briefly, a flash of recognition passing like lightning through the room. Eleanor felt the heat rise to her cheeks, though it was mingled with a thrill that set her heart hammering. The Duke's expression remained impassive, yet there was a flicker, almost imperceptible, that suggested intrigue beneath the surface of his rigid control. She found herself drawn forward, swept by a curiosity stronger than caution, until she was moving among the dancers, her gaze never leaving him. It was during a particularly intricate turn of the minuet that misfortune, or perhaps fate, struck. Eleanor, caught in the swirl of skirts and polished shoes, stepped too close to the Duke, accidentally brushing the sleeve of his coat with the delicate lace of her glove. A collective gasp rose from the nearby guests, as though a candle had been snuffed in the midst of sunlight. The Duke's gaze snapped to her, sharp and unforgiving, and the room seemed to hold its breath. Eleanor froze, aware in an instant of the eyes turned upon her, the murmurs swelling like a rising tide. "Do not challenge me," the Duke warned, his voice low yet carrying across the space in a manner that left no room for misunderstanding. Every syllable was measured, authoritative, the weight of command pressing upon her shoulders. Eleanor's heart beat fiercely, a chaotic rhythm that threatened to betray her composure. She felt the sting of embarrassment, the sudden, almost physical awareness of her misstep. The murmurs of the ton seemed to solidify around her like a tightening noose, the whisper of scandal curling through the chandeliers and gilded cornices. And yet, despite the humiliation, Eleanor did not retreat. Her hands clenched briefly at her sides, her breath steadying, as she met his gaze with something akin to defiance, though tempered by decorum. In that instant, the room, the music, the flickering candles, all fell away, leaving only the weight of two souls, starkly aware of the collision between duty and desire, authority and will. The Duke, formidable in practice in the art of control, felt something stir that he had not anticipated, a force immune to wealth, to rank, to social expectation, a force that challenged even him. The audience, attuned to the subtleties of behavior and reputation, observed this silent duel with avid attention. Whispers curled like smoke. Who is she? How dare she? Eleanor, however, held her ground, a strange mixture of fear and exhilaration coursing through her. She knew, even as her cheeks flamed, that this moment was a pivot upon which her evening, and perhaps her life, might turn. The Duke's hand twitched imperceptibly, the rigid line of his jaw betraying the faintest trace of internal conflict. Authority demanded condemnation, a swift correction to reassert his dominance. Yet something far more insidious, and infinitely more compelling, urged restraint. The spark of curiosity, of fascination, of unbidden admiration flickered where he had expected only annoyance or scorn. Eleanor, reading his posture and the subtle tension of his shoulders, recognized a challenge that could not be won with mere rank or wealth. The orchestra, perhaps sensing the shift in atmosphere, swelled into a crescendo that seemed to echo the pulse of the room itself. Eleanor, realizing the precariousness of her position, excused herself with the lightest of bows, retreating toward the outer hallways. The whispers continued, weaving through the marble pillars and gilded mirrors, yet her mind was no longer on reputation or propriety. She felt a curious exhilaration, a sense of having touched something forbidden yet entirely irresistible. The Duke watched her retreat, his expression unreadable, yet the dark intensity in his eyes lingered long after her figure disappeared behind the drapery. He had faced countless challenges in his life, claims on his estates, manipulations by rivals, the ceaseless demands of society, but never had he confronted one so immediate, so unconquerable. The flicker of something unspoken, of possibility and peril intertwined, left him momentarily disarmed. In Eleanor he faced the one force he could not command, the one element that would test the boundaries of his carefully constructed world. A young woman of spirit, courage, and will, who refused to be invisible, even in the face of a duke. As the evening progressed and the candles burned lower, the ballroom resumed its rhythms. Dances continued. Conversations hummed with polite veneer, and the aristocracy moved as though nothing had shifted. Yet beneath the veneer, a tension lingered, subtle yet undeniable, a silent acknowledgment of the collision that had occurred. Eleanor, moving quietly through the corridors, felt the spark of story unfolding, one she did not yet understand, yet one she could not ignore. The morning after the ball, the Ashbourne estate lay wrapped in a delicate haze of mist, the gardens glistening as if each drop of dew had been carefully placed by an unseen hand. Lady Eleanor wandered along the gravel paths, the soft rustle of her skirts mingling with the distant clatter of carriage wheels returning from deliveries and market trips. Her thoughts, however, were not on the dew or the orderly rose beds. They were consumed by the memory of last night, the Duke's voice resonating in her mind like a bell struck at midnight. Do not challenge me. That single admonition had lodged itself stubbornly, a paradoxical mixture of fear and exhilaration that refused to dissipate. She had never encountered a man whose presence could elicit such a contradictory blend of dread and desire. Across the estate, the Duke of Ashbourne, usually early and precise in his morning routines, lingered longer than customary in his study. His gaze, normally fixed on ledgers and correspondences detailing his sprawling holdings, drifted toward the eastern windows, where the garden stretched like a meticulously painted canvas. The image of Eleanor, so defiantly alive, haunted the corners of his mind. Authority, wealth, and reputation had taught him to anticipate and control every circumstance. Yet here was a young woman whose spirited nature threatened to unravel the strict boundaries he maintained. He could command armies of servants, dictate the fates of tenants, and navigate the intricacies of London society. But he could not command his own heart. A week passed, and the air between the Duke and Eleanor became a silent dialogue, a tension threaded through the smallest of gestures. At morning walks in the gardens, their paths occasionally intersected. A bow exchanged in passing, a fleeting glance that lingered longer than propriety allowed. Eleanor discovered, with equal parts apprehension and thrill, that the Duke's formidable exterior masked a mind both sharp and contemplative. He observed her not merely as one would observe a subject under study, but with a subtle curiosity, a recognition of wit and courage that flattered even as it unsettled. One afternoon, As the sun waned and painted the sky in tones of rose and amber, Eleanor received a small, unexpected parcel at her father's estate. It was a rare volume of poetry, bound in leather too fine for casual gifting, with pages filled with delicate script. A note accompanied it, succinct and deliberate, for Miss Eleanor, whose courage defies both expectation and convention. Ashbourne. Eleanor's fingers trembled as she held the gift, aware that its implications were far from trivial. The Duke, through the simple yet audacious gesture, had breached the walls of propriety, offering both admiration and challenge in equal measure. The very act was scandalous by societal standards, yet it spoke to a burgeoning intimacy that neither of them could yet define. The rumors began almost immediately. Gossip, as persistent and insidious as ivy, found its way through drawing rooms and garden parties. Whispers questioned propriety of a minor baronet's daughter, receiving attention from one of England's most eligible and powerful dukes. Eleanor's family, while outwardly pleased with the compliment implied by the Duke's interest, began to murmur cautions about the dangers of overstepping their social station. Yet Eleanor, reading the intentions behind the gift, felt a sense of exhilaration and, perhaps, destiny. She was aware of the risks, her reputation, the judgment of the tongue, the potential for misunderstanding, but the desire to engage, however carefully, with a mind as formidable as the Duke's, outweighed the fear. Evenings were punctuated by discreet encounters, fleeting yet laden with unspoken communication. In the library, Eleanor might find the Duke consulting the ledgers of his estates, yet a book left innocuously on a table would bear her note tucked between the pages. On the terrace, they spoke in tones low enough to escape notice, each conversation a delicate dance, balancing propriety and intimacy. Their words were precise, layered with meaning, revealing glimpses of character and vulnerability, yet always restrained by the omnipresent awareness of society's gaze. Eleanor learned that beneath his austere countenance, the Duke's mind was capable of tenderness, reflection, and subtle humor. He, in turn, discovered in her a sharpness of wit and courage that defied the expectations placed upon her by bloodline and upbringing. One evening, as a gentle rain fell, Eleanor wrapped herself in a cloak and ventured into the gardens to collect her thoughts. The soft tapping of raindrops against leaves and stone created a private symphony, the world reduced to water and shadow and the scent of wet earth. The Duke appeared without announcement, emerging from the shadows with quiet step, as though he had always belonged there. "You risk catching cold," he said, voice low, not admonishing but concerned, the edge of command softened by unaccustomed care. Eleanor looked up at him, noting the subtle tension in his posture, the rare flicker of vulnerability in his otherwise composed face. "And you risk being seen," she replied, a mischievous edge to her words. A shared smile, fleeting and dangerous, acknowledged the thrill of defiance, the silent acknowledgment that they were playing with forces neither could yet fully contain. Yet the specter of scandal loomed ever present. A letter, found by a nosy housemaid, could have caused irreparable damage. Eleanor's family expressed mild consternation, offering veiled warnings and subtle insistence on propriety. The Duke, aware of every whisper and rumor, exercised caution, balancing public expectation with private desire. Each encounter, each letter, each gesture was a careful negotiation, a tension-filled interplay that deepened both attraction and understanding. Both were acutely aware that the world around them would not tolerate indiscretion, and yet, in defiance, they found exhilaration. By the end of the fortnight, their connection had grown undeniable, yet neither had allowed it to be publicly acknowledged. Every look exchanged across a room, every brief touch of a gloved hand, was loaded with significance, a dialogue invisible to the outside world, but profoundly understood by both participants. The Duke, despite his extensive experience in the management of estates, alliances, and social maneuvering, felt unmoored. Eleanor's independence, her courage to confront and question, was a challenge to which he had no strategy, no rule book, no precedent. He was compelled to respond not with authority, but with attention, curiosity, and, increasingly, affection. And Eleanor, for her part, discovered a new facet of herself, a willingness to tread on the edges of convention, to engage boldly with a man whose station demanded distance and restraint, yet whose spirit seemed attuned to her own. In these clandestine exchanges, She found affirmation, exhilaration, and an unspoken promise of possibilities beyond rigid structures that had constrained her life. As twilight deepened and the last glimmer of day faded from the gardens, the Duke lingered near the terrace, watching Eleanor retreat toward the manor. Rain-soaked paths glistened under the dim lanterns, and the scent of wet roses hung in the air like a memory yet to be made. He understood, more clearly than ever, that this was no ordinary flirtation or passing curiosity. The evening concluded without incident, yet both were acutely aware that the next encounter, the next exchange of letters or glances, would carry the weight of scrutiny and expectation. Their connection, carefully nurtured amidst whispered rumors and stolen moments, was fragile, yet potent, and the tension between duty and desire grew ever more acute. Each knew that the path ahead was perilous, fraught with social pitfalls and the judgment of peers, yet neither could deny the growing allure of what they shared, a connection that promised passion, understanding, and a challenge that neither could resist. And so, as the manor settled into silence and candlelight flickered across the polished floors, the stage was set. The Duke and Lady Eleanor had begun their intricate, dangerous dance, each step measured, each glance laden with meaning. The world around them remained oblivious to the unfolding story, but the threads of intimacy, challenge, and scandal had been woven irrevocably, promising that the collision of authority and desire would continue, with consequences neither could yet fully anticipate. The library of Ashbourne Manor was hushed, save for the soft crackle of fire and the occasional rustle of pages, as the Duke of Ashbourne perused a ledger of estate matters. Bookshelves rose like silent sentinels to the ceiling, their leather-bound volumes rich with the knowledge and imagination of generations. It was here, amidst the scent of parchment and polished wood, that Lady Eleanor found herself drawn once more, carrying a small, carefully chosen collection of poetry that she had wished to share with him. Her approach was tentative, measured. Every step was weighed against the possibility of impropriety, yet propelled by an irresistible desire to be near him, to understand a man whose presence had so unsettled her heart. The Duke looked up at the faint creak of the library door, his dark eyes registering a flicker of recognition that softened, if only slightly, the usual rigidity of his expression. "Miss Eleanor," he said, voice even yet edged with a warmth he rarely displayed. "I did not expect you at this hour." His words, courteous and measured, carried beneath their surface an awareness of the significance of her visit. Eleanor curtsied lightly, placing the bundle of books upon a nearby table, her fingers brushing the polished wood with an almost reverent touch. "I thought," she began, carefully selecting her phrasing, "that you might find some interest in these verses. They are reflective, I believe, of thoughts we might hesitate to speak aloud." Her gaze held his, steady yet searching, as though she were inviting him into a dialogue that transcended mere propriety. The Duke's brows drew together briefly, not in disapproval, but in contemplation. He stepped forward, taking a slow, deliberate approach, the firelight casting shadows across his angular features. "These are not mere trifles," he observed, lifting a volume and turning its pages with care. "The words possess insight and courage." His tone, almost confessional in its rarity, carried an undercurrent of personal acknowledgment. Eleanor's pulse quickened. In his subtle commendation, she perceived a recognition not afforded lightly to any woman of her standing. She realized, with a mingling of pride and apprehension, that the Duke's regard was no superficial courtesy. It was deliberate, discerning, and deeply significant. A silence settled between them, weighted yet intimate. The crackle of the fire seemed amplified in the stillness, as though it punctuated their shared contemplation. Eleanor, emboldened by the quiet and the subtle invitation in his attention, ventured further. "Sir, may I ask, does your duty leave room for desire? Or is the world of Ashbourne so constraining that the heart's inclinations are of no account?" Her voice, though carefully modulated, trembled with the audacity of the question. The Duke's gaze lifted from the open pages, dark eyes meeting hers with gravity that silenced even the faint echo of the hearth. "There are forces," he said slowly, "that neither wealth nor title, nor even the most meticulous observance of duty can command. One may govern estates, dictate alliances, enforce law and expectation, but one cannot govern the stirrings of the heart." His admission was quiet yet potent, each word measured, each syllable resonant with the weight of experience and sudden vulnerability. Eleanor felt a shiver, not of cold, but of recognition, understanding that she had reached the rare, guarded inner chamber of a man accustomed to absolute control. She stepped closer, emboldened by this revelation, yet conscious of the delicate boundaries of propriety. Then, she murmured, perhaps the heart is the only domain where equality exists, where courage is measured not by birth or station, but by willingness to be known and to know in return. Her words hovered in the space between them, laden with meaning, delicate as the brush of silk across polished marble. The Duke inclined his head, a subtle acknowledgment of the truth she had spoken. The library, once a place of mere order and reflection, became a theater for intimacy. Their conversation flowed, restrained yet profound, exploring ideas, fears, and desires that the world outside would have dismissed as frivolous or dangerous. Eleanor discovered in the Duke a mind honed by responsibility, yet capable of tenderness, humor, and curiosity. He, in turn, perceived in her wit and courage a spirit untamed by expectation, one that mirrored freedom he longed to reclaim within the confines of his duty. Minutes passed with measured slowness, yet each felt like an eternity, suspended in the delicate balance between propriety and passion. The Duke, in a gesture that was at once small and monumental, extended his hand, not in command, nor in formality of greeting, but as an invitation. Eleanor, heart pounding, placed her gloved fingers lightly within his, the contact a spark igniting a fire that neither could contain within words alone. In that brief touch, both acknowledged the perilous intimacy growing between them, the unspoken promise that their connection defied convention. A sudden movement at the edge of the library, a servant's quiet entrance, reminded them of the persistent gaze of society. Eleanor withdrew slightly, her hand falling from his, yet neither sought to sever connection entirely. The Duke, his composure returning with the practiced ease of man used to managing crises, spoke again, voice low, almost private. "We tread a dangerous path, Miss Eleanor. One misstep, one careless word, and we invite scandal that neither of us could weather unscathed." She nodded, understanding fully the precarious balance they maintained. "I am aware, sir," she said softly, "and yet I am unwilling to retreat from the truth of this moment. Perhaps we may find a way to navigate both duty and desire, if only we proceed with care." Her words, measured yet fearless, elicited a rare, faint smile from the Duke. In that smile, Eleanor glimpsed both acknowledgment and challenge, a recognition that they would face difficulties, yet that the connection between them was neither trivial nor fleeting. The hours passed, the fire dwindled to embers, and the room grew dim with the onset of evening. They spoke in whispers now, confessions interlaced with poetry, the rhythm of their dialogue mirroring the intimate pulse of hearts unbound by social convention, yet restrained by necessity. Eleanor felt herself at the edge of a precipice, exhilarated and fearful in equal measure. The Duke, ever composed yet now undeniably human, revealed vulnerability that softened the hard lines of his public persona. Finally, as the last of the candles guttered, Eleanor rose to depart, the weight of reality settling upon her once more. The Duke, standing near the hearth, inclined his head in quiet regard, his gaze lingering in a manner that was both protective and possessive. "Until our next meeting," he said, deliberately ambiguous yet profoundly personal. Eleanor curtsied, a mixture of propriety and subtle triumph, understanding fully that the connection forged in the library would shape every encounter to come. As she walked toward the corridors leading to her chambers, Eleanor's mind swirled with the complexity of her emotions. The Duke of Ashbourne was no longer merely an imposing figure of authority. He was a man capable of tenderness, reflection, and passion, and she had glimpsed, however fleetingly, the depth of his regard. And though the path ahead promised challenges, rumors, and societal constraints, both understood that the foundation of something extraordinary had been laid, a connection that would test courage, honor, and desire in equal measure. By the time she reached her chamber, Eleanor paused at the threshold, glancing back toward the library, where shadows lingered as if waiting to witness the next chapter of their silent dialogue. The night had deepened, the manor quieted, yet the tension between duty and longing remained palpable. Both she and the Duke had ventured into territory neither fully controlled, and both understood that the delicate dance of private confession would inevitably lead to trials that could either strengthen their bond or shatter it entirely. The promise, unspoken yet undeniable, hung between them like the scent of rain on rose petals, a herald of intimacy, challenge, and the slow-burning force of passion that no social expectation could extinguish. The evening of the autumn gala arrived, draping Ashbourne Manor in a grandeur that outshone even the most lavish gatherings of the season. Chandeliers spilled a warm golden light upon polished floors, and the scent of roses and burning wax mingled with the faint aroma of spice wine. Lady Eleanor descended the grand staircase in a gown of deep emerald. Her chestnut curls swept into an elegant coil that accentuated the sharp intelligence of her eyes. The whispers began immediately, subtle yet insistent, as the ton took note of her entrance, the minor baronet's daughter whose audacity and wit had already sparked quiet scandal. Every glance toward the Duke was scrutinized, yet Eleanor held her poise, aware of the delicate theater in which she was both performer and participant. The Duke of Ashbourne stood at the far end of the ballroom, a figure commanding authority. Yet tonight his expression betrayed a tension unusual for one so accustomed to control. His dark eyes scanned the assembly, noting every gesture, every subtle movement. Yet inevitably they found Eleanor. Their shared glances were a silent exchange, a language crafted over stolen moments, exchanged books, and whispered words in the quiet of the library. The connection forged in private now pulsed visibly in the charged atmosphere of public scrutiny. Every step she took, every subtle tilt of her chin, seemed to defy convention, while simultaneously acknowledging it, a dance propriety and passion that only heightened the Duke's fascination. A waltz began, the orchestra swelling in harmonious crescendo, and Eleanor found herself approached by the Duke with the deliberate precision of a man both cautious and determined. "May I have this dance, Miss Eleanor?" he asked, voice measured yet low enough to be intimate, threading the room's murmurs into a private bubble of tension and possibility. She curtsied, and with a gentle inclination of her head, allowed him to take her hand. The moment their fingers brushed, an electric awareness passed between them, a recognition that the private confessions of weeks past were now perilously close to public acknowledgment. As they glided across the floor, Eleanor felt the thrill of being observed yet unseen, the delicate balance of attention and discretion. The Duke, guiding with subtle authority, allowed their movements to mirror the interplay of their spirits, controlled yet daring, precise yet imbued with unspoken yearning. Guests watched in polite admiration, some guessing at the unusual intensity of their connection, yet no one could fully decipher the undercurrent of shared understanding. Every step, every turn, was a testament to restraint, desire, and the careful negotiation between societal expectation and personal longing. After the dance, the Duke led Eleanor toward the terrace, where lanterns cast a soft glow over the manicured gardens, and the chill of the evening mingled with the warmth of proximity. The night air was crisp, scented with wet foliage from an earlier rain, and the sound of distant carriage wheels on cobblestones provided a muted accompaniment to their private moment. Eleanor's gloved hands rested lightly upon the railing, her mind alive with the tension of anticipation and the knowledge that every word, every gesture, carried significance beyond mere courtesy. The Duke, his posture relaxed yet alert, spoke first, voice low, deliberate, and wholly personal. "Miss Eleanor, these past weeks have been enlightening. You challenge me in ways I have long thought impossible. I have confronted many matters of import, debts, estates, alliances, but never have I encountered a force that unsettles me so profoundly." His words were careful, yet the depth of sincerity resonated in every syllable. Eleanor's heart quickened, aware that the acknowledgment of her influence was both validation and temptation, a recognition of quality, and yet a warning of the stakes inherent in their connection. She turned to face him fully, her eyes reflecting both courage and vulnerability. "And do you confess, then, that your heart is as unsettled as your tongue suggests?" she asked, the faintest smile teasing her lips. Her question was not frivolous. It was a measured probing, an invitation to honesty amidst the artifice of expectation. The Duke paused, considering propriety of revelation, the risks to reputation, yet the private sincerity they had nurtured demanded truth. "It is," he admitted finally, voice hushed but firm, "a force beyond control, beyond expectation. You have awakened in me a reckoning that no title or command can suppress." The words hung in the night, tangible and potent, binding them in a recognition that neither could fully renounce. Eleanor, emboldened, stepped closer, mindful of distance yet daring proximity. "Then let us tread carefully, sir," she murmured, "but not timidly. Let the world watch as it may, for our hearts are not so easily governed." The Duke inclined his head, a gesture of both agreement and reverence, acknowledging not only her courage but the parity of their will. In that instant, the terrace, the garden, and the manor beyond became a realm separate from the rigid expectations of society, a private dominion of trust, understanding, and mutual desire. Yet even as intimacy deepened, the specter of scandal lingered. The faint echo of distant laughter, the whispered comments of servant, reminded them that their connection existed under constant observation. The Duke, ever conscious of perception, tightened his hand around hers, a subtle anchor against the pressures encroaching upon them. Eleanor, recognizing the gravity of their situation, met his gaze steadily. "We are bound by convention," she said softly, "yet unbound in spirit. That may be our greatest challenge and our greatest triumph." As the night progressed, they returned indoors, moving quietly through corridors that now felt less a place of duty and more a stage for mutual understanding. They spoke in measured tones, reflecting on the weeks of clandestine letters, the stolen glances in libraries and gardens, and the subtle yet unmistakable attraction that had woven itself into every interaction. Each shared memory, each whispered sentiment, was a stone laid upon the path toward recognition and resolution. Finally, the Duke led Eleanor to the grand staircase once more, the same one where weeks earlier the collision of wills had first ignited the spark. He paused, eyes dark and earnest, and offered a hand in a gesture both formal and intimate. "Miss Eleanor," he said, voice resonant with certainty, "I will not allow the weight of expectation to dictate the inclinations of my heart. If we are to face the world together, it must be with courage, honesty, and unwavering regard for one another." Eleanor, her own heart steady despite the surge of emotion, placed her hand in his, a silent agreement and a testament to the trials they had navigated. As they descended the staircase, side by side, the murmurs of the ballroom seemed distant, their significance diminished by the clarity of shared intention. The Duke and Eleanor had confronted the turbulence of duty, desire, and social expectation, emerging with a bond tempered by honesty and strengthened by courage. The whispers of society might persist, the judgment of peers might linger, yet within the quiet fortitude of their union lay the promise of something enduring, a recognition that love, once ignited, could defy even the strictest of societal boundaries. By the time they reached the base of the staircase, the music of the orchestra swelled once more, filling the space with notes both lively and deliberate. The Duke bowed, a gesture of respect and devotion, and Eleanor returned the bow, her eyes bright with understanding and anticipation. The moment was delicate, precise, and complete, yet pregnant with the knowledge that their story had only begun. The manor, resplendent in its autumnal glory, seemed to acknowledge the shift, a subtle recognition that two wills, equal and resolute, had begun to navigate the intersection of duty and desire with a grace that would shape every day to come.